This street rat in my home. Are you out of your mind, Richard?" His voice cut through her fury, dangerously calm, a steel edge beneath the surface. "She needs help. She will work here. That is final. A penniless orphan, rescued from the streets, brought into the heart of staggering wealth, only to face the venomous rage of the woman who ruled the mansion. Why did the billionaire risk his perfectly ordered world for a complete stranger, and trapped between his unexpected protection and his fiancée's consuming jealousy, could Ella possibly survive the storm she never asked for? The rhythmic hiss of the steam iron was the soundtrack to Ella's life. It punctuated the pre-dawn quiet, a steady beat against the backdrop of a city still stirring awake. Henderson's laundry wasn't much, just a small shop tucked away on a side street, smelling perpetually of soap and hot cotton. But for Ella, it was everything. It was work shelter, the entire map of her small world. An orphan since childhood, drifting through the indifferent care system, she'd found a precarious foothold here 2 years ago. Her home was a thin mat, tucked discreetly behind a stack of finished laundry baskets. Her possessions, a single copper plate, and a small worn bag containing a change of clothes, and one other treasure, a faded sketchbook. Its pages were filled not with grand designs, but with quiet observations. The pattern of cracks on the pavement, the way light fell on folded shirts, the tired lines on Mr. Henderson's face. It was a secret comfort, a whisper of a dream she barely dared to acknowledge anymore. This morning, like most mornings, she sat on her mat, finishing her meager breakfast. A small portion of yesterday's rice, softened with a little water. It wasn't much, but it filled the hollow ache in her stomach. Well, she thought with a fleeting wry internal smile, at least the stomach isn't complaining loudly. That's a win. She carefully washed her cup and plate in the small sink at the back, readying herself for the day, as Mr. Henderson unlocked the front door, letting in the pale morning light. The bell above the door chimed, announcing the first customer. Ella instinctively smoothed down her simple, slightly frayed apron. A woman swept in, radiating an aura of expensive perfume and impatience. She was dressed impeccably, in a silk blouse, the color of cream, and sharply tailored trousers, her perfectly styled hair framing a face that held a distinct air of displeasure, as if the mere act of entering this humble establishment was an inconvenience. This was Victoria, a regular customer known for her demanding nature and her connection to one of the shop's most important clients. Henderson Victoria called out, her voice sharp, bypassing Ella as if she were invisible. "Are my things ready?" I specified. They needed to be done. "By 8 sharp." Mr. Henderson hurried out from the small back office, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yes, Madame Victoria, right away. Ella has them ready." He nodded towards Ella, who quickly gathered a neatly folded stack of clothes wrapped in protective plastic. As Ella moved towards the counter, her focus entirely on the pristine bundle in her arms, she didn't register. Victoria taking an abrupt step sideways to examine a spot on her handbag. Their paths intersected. The collision was minor, a slight jostle, but the consequence was immediate. The top garment in Ella's stack, a delicate white blouse, slipped from the plastic and brushed against Victoria's cream silk top, leaving a faint smudge of dust from the floor Ella had just swept. Victoria gasped, recoiling as if struck, her eyes cold and assessing moments before flashed with fury. "Are you blind?" She snapped her voice dangerously low. She jabbed a perfectly manicured finger towards the almost imperceptible mark on her blouse. "Look what you've done. This imbecile girl." Ella's heart plummeted. The world seemed to tilt. "Oh, ma'am, I am so terribly sorry," she stammered, her hands trembling as she reached instinctively to try and brush the mark away. It was an accident, please. Don't touch me, Victoria hissed, swatting Ella's hand away. An accident? You clumsy oaf. Do you have any idea how much this blouse costs? More than you probably earn in a year. Or perhaps, she added, her voice dripping with scorn as she looked Ella up and down, taking in her worn clothes, more than you've earned in your entire miserable life. Tears pricked Ella's eyes, blurring her vision. Humiliation washed over her, hot and suffocating. I'm very, very sorry, Mum. Please let me try to clean it. Clean it? With what, your dirty rags? Victoria scoffed. She ignored Ella completely, now turning her fury towards Mr. Henderson, who stood frozen behind the counter. His expression, a mixture of fear and helplessness. Henderson, is this the standard of service you provide now, employing incompetent fools who damage customers' property? Madam Victoria, please, Mr. Henderson, began his voice, weak. It's just a tiny smudge. Ella is usually very careful. She's a good worker, a good worker. Victoria cut him off with a contemptuous laugh. She's a menace. I will not tolerate this. You need to get rid of her. Immediately, Mr. Henderson paled. Madame, I can't just... Victoria leaned closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper, loud enough only for him and Ella to hear. Listen to me carefully. Henderson, you will fire her. Now, or you will lose my business. And not just mine. Think about Richard. You know how much his custom means to this little shop. Do you really want to risk upsetting him over her? The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Richard Sterling, the wealthy businessman whose vast amount of laundry kept the shop afloat, was Victoria's fiancé. Losing his patronage would cripple Mr. Henderson's already struggling business. Mr. Henderson visibly deflated his shoulders, slumping. He avoided Ella's pleading eyes, his gaze fixed on the worn linoleum floor. He cleared his throat, the sound rough. Ella's breath hitched. Sir, please, I didn't mean Ella. He repeated, his voice, barely audible, thick with regret. You heard Madam Victoria. I value your work, child. I truly do. But my hands are tied. I can't afford this. The unspoken words, I can't afford to lose Richard Sterling's business, echoed in the silence. I'm sorry. You'll have to pack your things. You need to leave. The floor seemed to drop away beneath Ella's feet. Leave, she whispered, disbelief, warring with rising panic. But where will I go? This is my home, sir. Please, Mr. Henderson, don't do this. I have nowhere else. Tears streamed freely down her face, now unchecked. Please, sir, Mr. Henderson, winced, unable to meet her desperate gaze. He shook his head slowly, a picture of defeated resignation. I'm truly sorry, Ella. I wish things were different. Victoria watched the exchange with a cold smirk of satisfaction. She adjusted her pristine blouse, turning dismissively towards the door. That should teach you to watch where you're going, she remarked coolly, without a backward glance, before sweeping out of the shop, the bell chiming mockingly behind her. Ella sank slowly to her knees amidst the piles of clean laundry, the scent of soap suddenly cloying and unbearable. The small, familiar world she had carefully constructed had just shattered around her. She squeezed her eyes shut, clutching numbly at the worn apron covering her chest. Outside, the city was waking up oblivious. But for Ella, standing, or rather kneeling at the precipice of homelessness, the day felt like it had already ended before it truly began. Her few belongings, including the precious sketchbook filled with silent dreams, waited in the corner. Suddenly symbols not of comfort, but of terrifying uncertainty. Where could she possibly go now? The city streets were a harsh labyrinth for someone with nowhere to go. For 3 days, Ella drifted a ghost, haunting the edges of bustling life. Hunger gnawed persistently, a dull ache that mirrored the deeper hollowness inside her. She learned quickly to make herself small, invisible-seeking shelter in doorways from the biting night wind and the casual cruelty of averted gazes. Sleep offered little respite, fragmented by fear and the rumble of passing trucks. Yet amidst the despair, a stubborn spark refused to be extinguished. The same resilience that had carried her through years of uncertainty flickered still. She would survive. She had to. On the fourth day, driven by a gnawing emptiness and the need for any port in the storm, she stumbled upon a large, unfinished building site. Concrete skeletons clawed at the sky, surrounded by stacks of bricks and bags of cement. It looked rough, potentially dangerous, but it also represented possibility. Taking a deep breath, summoning courage, she didn't feel. Ella slipped past a gap in the temporary fencing. Inside, the air was thick with the dust of construction. A group of men already hard at work, mixing mortar and hauling bricks, stopped and stared as she approached her small figure, looking utterly out of place. "Hey, what are you doing here?" One of them called out, his tone, gruff but not immediately hostile. Ella clasped her hands tightly, trying to still their trembling. "Please, sir." She began, her voice, barely more than a whisper at first, then gaining strength. I need work, desperately. I lost my job, and I have nowhere to stay. I can work hard. I'll do anything. Carry bricks, fetch water, mix, cement. Please just give me a chance." The men exchanged skeptical glances. One chuckled, "This ain't no place for a slip of a girl like you. This is heavy labor, I know it is." Ella insisted, meeting his gaze directly. "But I'm stronger than I look. And I learn fast, please." There was a moment of hesitation. Then an older worker, his face weathered by sun. And time spoke up, a touch of gruff kindness in his voice. All right, lads. Let her wait for the foreman. He'll be here soon enough." He turned back to Ella. "You sit tight over there, out of the way. We'll see what he says." He then added, with a slight grin, nudging his mate. "Careful there, boys. This one looks like she might steal all our jobs. Got more spirit than young Tommy here." The light jest, though small, felt like a tiny crack of light in Ella's overwhelming darkness. Grateful, Ella found a spot on a stack of unused planks, pulling her worn bag close, making herself as unobtrusive as possible. She watched the men work, the rhythmic clang of tools and shouts echoing around the cavernous space. Hope, fragile and tentative, began to flutter in her chest. An hour later, a sleek black car pulled up just outside the site entrance. A man emerged, tall and dressed in sharp trousers, a crisp white shirt, and sturdy safety boots that looked incongruously expensive against the dusty ground. His face was stern, etched with lines of authority, his eyes sharp and observant as they swept across the site. This was clearly the man in charge. The foreman, seeing him arrive quickly, briefed him, gesturing towards Ella. The man strode purposefully towards where Ella sat. He stopped a few feet away, his assessing gaze traveling over her from head to toe, taking in her worn clothes, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the undisguised desperation in her eyes. "The foreman tells me you're looking for work." He stated, his voice, deep and resonant, carrying easily over the site noise. It wasn't unkind, but it held no hint of softness either. Ella scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Yes, sir. I am. I need work very badly, sir. I'll do my absolute best, I promise." He raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "This is a construction site, not a playground. The work is demanding, potentially hazardous. It requires strength and stamina." He paused, his eyes seeming to weigh her up. "Are you certain you are capable?" "Yes, sir," Ella said firmly, forcing herself to stand tall, despite her fear. I am capable, and I am a hard worker. Please, sir, just give me an opportunity." There was a long silence. The man's expression remained unreadable. Ella held her breath, praying silently. Finally, he gave a curt nod, more to the foreman than to her. "All right, give her a trial. Tomorrow morning." But he added, his gaze flicking back to Ella. "Sharp and direct. If you cannot keep up, or if you become a liability, you're gone." Understood. Relief washed over Ella so intensely, her knees almost buckled. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Oh, thank you." He didn't acknowledge her thanks, simply turned and began discussing blueprints with the foreman, his attention already shifted elsewhere. As the workers returned to their tasks, Ella sank back onto the planks, tears welling up. Tears not of sadness this time, but of overwhelming gratitude for this sliver of a chance. The work was harder than she could have imagined. The following days were a blur of aching muscles, sweat and grime. She hauled heavy buckets of water, her arms screaming in protest. She learned to mix cement and sand, the rough materials scraping her hands raw. She carried stacks of bricks, balanced precariously, her small frame straining under the load. But she didn't complain. She pushed through the pain, fueled by the sheer terror of being back on the streets. This was her lifeline. She worked diligently, silently keeping her head down, yet she couldn't help but be aware of the man who had hired her. Richard Sterling, the owner of the development company she learned from snippets of conversation. He visited the site periodically, his presence always commanding immediate attention. He never spoke directly to her. After that first day, his interactions strictly business with the foreman or engineers, but sometimes Ella would catch his eye sweeping over the site, a brief, unreadable glance that might linger for a fraction of a second on her before moving on. Was it disapproval, concern, or just the detached assessment of an owner inspecting his property? She couldn't tell. Then, after nearly a week of back-breaking labor, the foreman approached her at the end of the day, his face etched with discomfort. "Ella," he began hesitantly. "Mr. Sterling, he noticed you again today." Ella's fragile hope faltered. Is something wrong? Did I make a mistake?" The foreman sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. No, nothing like that. You're a hard worker, girl. Everyone sees that. But, Mr. Sterling, he's concerned. He told me. He said this work is too strenuous, too dangerous for you. He feels it's not right. For your own safety, he said, he has to let you go. He pressed a small amount of cash into her hand, her wages for the week. "I'm sorry, Ella. Truly." He seemed, well, conflicted about it, but his mind's made up. The world swam before Ella's eyes, fired again, not for doing wrong, but because she was deemed too fragile. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She mumbled a thank you, took the money with numb fingers and turned away before the foreman could see the fresh wave of tears threatening to spill. She found a secluded corner behind a stack of unused pipes as the other workers packed up to leave. The brief hope she had clung to crumbled into dust, sinking onto the ground. She pulled out her worn sketchbook and a stub of pencil. With trembling hands, she began to draw. Not the precise lines of observation from before, but fierce, jagged strokes, pouring her frustration, her despair, her helplessness onto the page. Why? Why was life so determined to break her? Meanwhile, Richard Sterling settled back into the plush leather seat of his car, the driver pulling smoothly away from the construction site. He glanced idly out the window, his mind already moving on to the next meeting, the next deal, and then his gaze snagged. Just for a second, he saw a small figure huddled in the encroaching shadows near the site perimeter. Shoulders slumped, head bent over something in her lap. Ella, a fleeting, unexpected pang of something, guilt, regret, tightened in his chest before he forced his attention back to his phone, the image fading but not entirely gone. Was letting her go truly the right thing? Or had he just pushed someone already on the edge one step closer to falling? A few days later, the lingering image of the girl huddled by the construction site still pricked at Richard Sterling's conscience. An unusual and unwelcome sensation. He found himself driving towards Henderson's laundry, ostensibly to collect a batch of freshly cleaned shirts, but a deeper motive pulled him there. Mr. Henderson greeted him with his usual deferential warmth. "Mr. Sterling, good afternoon. Your shirts are ready, sir." "Perfectly pressed." Richard nodded, accepting the package. Then, keeping his tone casual, he asked, "That young woman who used to work here? Ella, was it? What happened to her? I noticed she wasn't at the site the other day, mister." Henderson's smile faltered instantly. He fidgeted, avoiding Richard's direct gaze. Ella. Yes, well, sir, there was an incident." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. A customer wasn't happy. Demanded I let her go. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "A customer? Who?" The laundry owner swallowed hard. It was Madame Victoria, sir, your fiancée." He recounted the story reluctantly. The spilled water, Victoria's fury, the ultimatum. "She was very upset, sir. Said Ella was clumsy, incompetent, threatened to take her business elsewhere. And yours too, sir. If I didn't dismiss the girl immediately, I had no choice. Mr. Sterling, truly." A cold knot tightened in Richard's stomach. So Victoria. He recalled her complaining vaguely about some incompetent help somewhere. But he hadn't paid much attention, now hearing the full story, picturing the desperation in Ella's eyes at the construction site. Fury mixed with a heavy wave of guilt washed over him. He had fired her a second time, albeit out of a misplaced sense of concern, without knowing the full injustice she had already suffered at the hands of his own fiancée. "I see," Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. The muscle in his jaw tightened. "And do you know where Ella went after she left here?" Mr. Henderson shook his head sadly. "No idea, sir. She just left. Looked like she didn't have anywhere to go." Poor girl. Richard thanked the man curtly, his mind racing. He left the shop, the pristine shirts forgotten for the moment. He had to find her. He couldn't shake the image of her face, the quiet resilience, warring with deep vulnerability. It wasn't just guilt. It was a sense of responsibility, sharp and undeniable. He spent the next few hours driving, methodically checking the areas around the laundry shop, then the construction site. His frustration mounting with each empty street corner. As evening bled into night, a cold rain began to fall, slicking the pavements and blurring the streetlights. Just as he was about to give up his headlights, cut through the downpour, and illuminated a small, drenched figure huddled in the recessed doorway of a closed shop, trying desperately to shield a worn bag from the rain. It was Ella. He pulled the car over sharply, the engine humming quietly. Rolling down the passenger window, he called out his voice, cutting through the sound of the rain. "Ella." She flinched, looking up, her eyes wide with fear and confusion in the sudden glare of the headlights. Seeing who it was, she scrambled to her feet, looking like a startled fawn ready to bolt. Mr. Sterling, what are you doing out here in this?" he asked, his tone softer now, laced with concern that surprised even himself. Ella shivered, hugging her bag tighter. I don't have anywhere else to go, sir," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the rain, her gaze fixed on the wet pavement. Richard's frown deepened. The sight of her so small and utterly defeated solidified his resolve. "Get in the car, Ella." She hesitated, visibly torn. "Sir, I don't want to be a bother." Pride warred with the misery of her situation. "You're not a bother," he stated firmly, leaving no room for argument. "I can't leave you out here, like this. It's not safe. Please get in." After a long moment, drenched and trembling, Ella relented. She cautiously opened the heavy car door and slid onto the plush leather seat, looking impossibly small and out of place in the opulent interior. Richard turned up the heat, the quiet hum of the luxury vehicle, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. As they drove through the glittering, rain-streaked city streets, Richard asked gentle questions, drawing out her story: the laundry job, the construction site, the constant struggle just to find a safe place to rest her head. He listened in silence, his earlier guilt solidifying into a quiet anger directed at Victoria, and at his own initial obliviousness. "You're too young to endure all this alone," he said finally, his voice low. "You'll come to my house. You can work there. You'll have a proper room, food safety." Ella's eyes widened in disbelief. Your house, sir." "But, Madam Victoria is my concern, not yours," Richard interrupted firmly. "You need help, and I am offering it. I won't have you sleeping on the streets." "It's decided." They pulled into the sweeping driveway of a large, modern mansion, its windows glowing warmly against the dark, rainy night. As Richard led Ella inside, the sheer scale and luxury of the place made her feel even smaller, more inadequate. The entrance hall was vast, with polished marble floors and abstract art adorning the walls. As she hesitated, by an automated floor-to-ceiling glass door that slid open silently as they approached, Richard offered a rare, small smile. "Don't worry," he said, quietly noticing her brief confusion. "Sometimes the house seems to have a mind of its own. Even confuses me occasionally." The light, unexpected comment momentarily eased the tension knotting inside her, but the reprieve was short-lived. From the archway leading to a grand living room, Victoria appeared. She stopped dead, her perfectly made-up face freezing into a mask of disbelief, then twisting into unconcealed fury as her eyes landed on Ella, dripping rainwater onto the pristine floor. "Richard, what is the meaning of this?" Victoria demanded, her voice sharp as ice shards. "Who is this creature, and what is she doing in my house?" Richard remained calm, positioning himself slightly between Victoria and the trembling Ella. "Her name is Ella, and she will be staying here." "Staying here," Victoria's voice rose incredulous and shrill. This street rat in my home. Are you out of your mind?" "Richard, I am perfectly sane." "Victoria," he replied, his tone firm, unyielding. "Ella needs help. She will work here, and she will have a safe place to stay. That is final." Victoria threw her hands up in exasperation, her eyes blazing. "Final? You bring this nobody into our home without even consulting me. Do you know how this looks? What people will say?" "I don't particularly care what people will say," Richard stated evenly, his gaze unwavering. "What matters is doing what's right. Ella is staying." He then turned to the stunned and terrified Ella. "Let me show you to your room." He led Ella away from the fuming Victoria, down a quiet corridor to a modest but clean and comfortable room. It had a real bed, a small wardrobe, even a window overlooking a rain-washed garden. It felt like an impossible dream, as Richard left her to settle in the door, clicking softly shut behind him. Ella sank onto the edge of the soft bed, her body trembling from cold and shock. The warmth and safety of the room were undeniable, a stark contrast to the harsh reality she had faced just hours before. But Victoria's venomous glare, her undisguised hatred, lingered vividly in Ella's mind. Had she merely traded one form of precariousness for another? Clutching her worn sketchbook to her chest, a tangible piece of her old life in this overwhelmingly new and intimidating space, Ella couldn't shake the feeling that her troubles were far from over. This grand house, for all its comfort, felt more like a beautiful cage, guarded by a very angry dragon. The days that followed settled into a tense, suffocating rhythm within the grand walls of Richard Sterling's mansion. For Ella, it was a tightrope walk over a chasm of anxiety, balanced only by a desperate gratitude for the roof over her head. Victoria, seemingly accepting Ella's presence as an unfortunate fixture, unleashed her displeasure not through outright confrontation in front of Richard, but through a campaign of subtle, persistent cruelty whenever they were alone. No task Ella performed was ever quite right. The floors, though spotless, always had a missed corner, Victoria would point out with a sneer. "Is this how you sweep utterly useless?" The dusting meticulously done somehow failed to meet Victoria's exacting standards. Honestly, a child could do better. Must I oversee everything myself? Meals became another trial. When Richard was home, Ella ate properly, served by the quiet, observant housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, who treated Ella with reserved kindness. But when Richard was away, Victoria often intercepted, claiming there wasn't enough food prepared, or that Ella should manage on her own. More than once, Ella went to bed with her stomach aching, subsisting on a piece of fruit saved from breakfast or nothing at all. She never complained, fearing any word would lead back to the streets. But the gnawing hunger was a constant reminder of her precarious position. Through it all, Ella clung to her routine, performing her duties with quiet diligence. In stolen moments, usually late at night in the safety of her small room, she would take out her worn sketchbook and the few cheap pencils she'd managed to buy with a fraction of her first small payment from Mr. Henderson. Sketching was her anchor, a way to process the fear and loneliness, to reaffirm a part of herself that Victoria couldn't touch. Richard, initially preoccupied with his demanding business schedule, began to notice the subtle shifts in his household's atmosphere. He saw the way Ella sometimes flinched, almost imperceptibly, when Victoria entered a room, the way she kept her eyes downcast, moving through the house like a silent shadow. He noticed the stark contrast between Victoria's increasingly frequent complaints about trivial matters, a delayed delivery, a social slight, and Ella's quiet acceptance and unwavering politeness, even when clearly exhausted. He found himself observing Ella more often, the neatness of her work, the gentleness with which she handled objects, the rare, fleeting smile that touched her lips when Mrs. Gable offered a kind word. One afternoon, observing Victoria, dramatically lamenting a minor scheduling conflict for a charity gala she barely cared about, Richard found his patience wearing thin. What she truly needs, he thought with a flicker of dry cynicism, isn't a new dress for the event, but a strong dose of reality. The thought startled him with its disloyalty, yet felt undeniably true. His engagement to Victoria, once a logical step based on shared social circles and expectations, felt increasingly hollow, strained. A few days later, Richard returned home from a business trip slightly earlier than expected. He found Ella in a quiet corner of the library, dusting her precious sketchbook, lying open on a nearby table. He saw a surprisingly intricate sketch of the rain-washed garden visible from her window. He paused, struck by the detail, the unexpected talent. An impulse born of a growing respect and a desire to offer some small measure of encouragement took hold. The next evening he returned home, carrying not only his briefcase, but also a small, flat package. He found Ella polishing silverware in the dining room. "Ella," he said quietly, "I saw your drawings the other day. You have talent." He held out the package. "This is just something small. Perhaps you might find it useful." Ella stared at the package, then at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Hesitantly, she took it. Inside was a set of quality drawing pencils and a new, sturdy sketchbook. Tears immediately sprang to her eyes. "Sir, I don't know what to say. This is too much. Thank you. Truly thank you." Her voice trembled with emotion. It was the first real gift, given freely and with kindness, she could remember receiving. "You're welcome, Ella," Richard said, a genuine warmth in his voice. "Keep practicing." Their quiet moment was shattered by a sharp, imperious voice from the doorway. "Richard, what is going on here?" Victoria stood there, her eyes narrowed suspiciously, taking in the scene. The gift in Ella's hands, the tears on her cheeks, the gentle expression on Richard's face. "I simply gave Ella a small gift, Victoria," Richard replied calmly, though he braced himself internally. Victoria stalked closer, her gaze fixed on the art supplies like a hawk spotting prey. "A gift for her." Her voice dripped with venomous disbelief. "Art supplies? Are you encouraging this delusion?" She snatched the new sketchbook from Ella's unresisting fingers, flipping through the pages with contempt. "What is this nonsense? Scribbles you think drawing pictures makes you special, makes you worthy of being in this house." "Victoria, that's enough," Richard warned, his voice hardening. But Victoria was beyond reason, fueled by a potent cocktail of jealousy and insecurity. Her eyes landed on Ella's old, worn sketchbook lying nearby, where Ella had placed it while working. With a sudden, vicious movement, Victoria seized the old sketchbook too. "And this pathetic thing," she shrieked, "filled with your pointless little fantasies." "No, please." Ella cried out, reaching instinctively for the old book, the repository of her secret hopes and observations. Before Richard could react, Victoria ripped the worn cover off the old sketchbook. Then, with a cruel, deliberate motion, she began tearing out the pages, scattering the drawings, Ella's private world, across the polished floor. She snapped the new pencils one by one, tossing the pieces contemptuously at Ella's feet. "You think you can just waltz in here and capture his attention with your pitiful act? You are nothing. A servant. Remember your place." Ella stood, frozen tears streaming down her face, watching helplessly as fragments of her inner life were destroyed. "Victoria." Richard's voice cracked through the room like a whip. He stepped forward, his face pale with a fury Ella had never seen before. He grabbed Victoria's wrist, forcing her to stop her destructive rampage. "Have you lost your mind? Completely? Look at what you've done." Victoria wrenched her arm free, her chest heaving. "She deserved it. Trying to get your attention. Trying to take what's mine. Taking what's yours." Richard's voice was dangerously low, shaking with controlled rage. "By drawing in a sketchbook, by accepting a simple gift. No, Victoria. This isn't about her. This is about your own venom, your own insecurity. This cruelty stops now. You have gone too far." Victoria stared at him, momentarily stunned by the intensity of his anger before her expression hardened into resentful fury. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, slamming a door elsewhere in the mansion moments later. The silence left behind was heavy, broken only by Ella's choked sobs, as she knelt, trying futilely to gather the torn pages of her old sketchbook. The broken pencils scattered like casualties around her. Richard watched her, his anger slowly giving way to a profound sense of dismay and a deepening empathy for the small, trembling figure before him. He stepped closer, hesitated, then spoke his voice, rough but gentle, trying to inject a sliver of normalcy into the charged atmosphere. Perhaps he said his tone dry, attempting a shaky lightness. I should seriously consider thicker soundproofing for this house. Ella looked up at him through her tears, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, at the unexpected, slightly humorous remark amidst the wreckage. She couldn't manage a smile, but the tension in her shoulders eased fractionally. Richard knelt beside her, not touching, but simply being present, his gaze resting on the scattered, ruined drawings. A line had been irrevocably crossed. The fragile peace of the household was shattered, and the question of what came next hung unspoken, but palpable in the air between them. A strange calm descended upon the mansion. In the days following the incident with the sketchbook, Victoria surprisingly seemed to retreat. The constant criticism ceased. The open hostility vanished, replaced by an unnerving, almost polite distance. Ella found herself wary, unable to trust this sudden peace, her senses on high alert for the next storm. Then, one afternoon, Victoria approached Ella in the hallway, an uncharacteristically gentle expression on her face. "Ella," she began, her voice soft, almost conciliatory. "Can we talk for a moment? Please sit down." She gestured towards the plush sofas in the living room, a space Ella had always felt implicitly forbidden from occupying comfortably. Hesitantly, Ella perched on the edge of the cushion, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. Victoria sat opposite her, leaning forward slightly. "Look, Ella," she said, attempting a sincere look. "I know I haven't been fair to you since you arrived. I've been stressed, perhaps jealous. I reacted badly the other day with your things. I regret that. Truly, I want to make amends. Can we start over? Perhaps even be like sisters?" Ella blinked, momentarily stunned by the abrupt change. A part of her desperately wanted to believe it, to grasp onto the hope of a peaceful existence, yet instinct screamed caution, Mum. She began carefully. "I appreciate that. Thank you. I hold no grudges. I'm just grateful to be here." Victoria smiled, a warmth entering her eyes that didn't quite reach their depths. "Good, I'm glad." She paused as if gathering courage. "Could I ask you a small favor then, as a sign of goodwill?" "Of course, Mum. Anything," Ella replied, eager to maintain this fragile truce. "I'm feeling a little unwell today," Victoria said, touching her forehead lightly, "and I have a craving for some simple noodles. Richard always says that you have a knack for simple, comforting food. Would you mind making me a bowl?" Relief mingled with surprise in Ella's chest. A simple request, an olive branch. Perhaps Victoria truly meant it. "Of course, Ma'am. Right away." Glad for a task, a way to bridge the awkwardness, Ella hurried to the kitchen. She carefully prepared the noodles just the way she imagined someone feeling unwell might like them. Plain, warm, nourishing. As she carried the steaming bowl back towards the living room, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe things could actually get better. She placed the bowl on the coffee table in front of Victoria. "Here you are, Ma'am. I hope you feel better soon." "Thank you, Ella. That's very kind," Victoria murmured, picking up the spoon, but not yet eating. Ella excused herself and headed back towards the kitchen, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in weeks. She had barely reached the kitchen doorway when Victoria's voice shrieked from the living room, laced with terror and accusation. "Ah, what is this? What have you done?" Ella's blood ran cold. She spun around and rushed back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Madam, what's wrong? What happened?" Victoria was standing now, pushing the bowl away violently, its contents sloshing onto the expensive rug. Her face was a mask of theatrical horror and fury. You wicked girl. You tried to poison me," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Ella. "What did I ever do to you to deserve this?" Ella stared aghast, the world tilting sickeningly. "Poison, madam. No, I swear I didn't put anything in your food. Why would I do that? Please believe me, liar!" Victoria shrieked, clutching her throat dramatically. "I saw you. When you brought it in, you sprinkled something on top. You want me dead. You want to take my place." Tears streamed down her face, perfectly timed as heavy footsteps sounded in the hall. Richard had just walked in, drawn by the commotion. He stopped short, taking in the scene, the overturned bowl, Victoria seemingly hysterical, Ella white-faced and trembling. "What on earth is going on here?" he demanded, his voice tight with alarm. "Richard, thank God you're here!" Victoria cried, rushing towards him and collapsing dramatically against his chest. "She tried to kill me. This viper you brought into our home. She poisoned my food." She pointed weakly back at Ella. "Look at her. She wants me gone." "No, sir." "I swear I didn't." Ella pleaded desperation, making her voice shake uncontrollably. "I would never—" "Madame, please, tell him." But Victoria only sobbed louder, clinging to Richard. "She's lying, Richard. Don't believe her. She wants to harm me." Caught between Victoria's accusations and Ella's desperate denials, Richard looked utterly confused and distressed. Ella felt a surge of panic, the injustice burning through her fear. She couldn't let this happen. She wouldn't be framed like this. In a moment of pure, unthinking desperation, to prove her innocence, she lunged forward, snatched the bowl from the table where Victoria had shoved it, scooped up a large spoonful of the remaining noodles and broth, and swallowed it defiantly before anyone could stop her. There she choked out, meeting Victoria's stunned gaze. "You see, there's nothing wrong with it. I didn't poison you, Her words died in her throat. A sudden excruciating pain ripped through her stomach, doubling her over. The room spun, violently, colors blurring. She gasped, clutching her abdomen, as black spots danced before her eyes. "Ella!" Richard shouted, disentangling himself from Victoria and rushing towards her just as her knees buckled. He caught her as she collapsed, her body suddenly limp. "Ella, what's happening? Are you all right?" She couldn't answer, only moan her breath, coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The pain was blinding, terrifying. Victoria stood aside, her feigned tears instantly drying up. A flicker of cold, calculating triumph, quickly masked, flashed in her eyes as she watched Ella writhe on the floor. "I told you, Richard," she whispered, a tremor of feigned horror in her voice. "I told you she put something in it. Help me get her to the car." Richard snapped his face, grim with panic. He lifted Ella's surprisingly light form into his arms. "We need to get her to the hospital now." He raced out of the house, leaving Victoria standing alone amidst the mess. The faint, cruel curve of a smile finally touching her lips, before vanishing just as quickly. The hours that followed were a blur of sterile white walls, anxious waiting, and the rhythmic beeping of machines. Richard paced the hospital waiting room like a caged tiger, his mind replaying the horrific scene, Victoria's accusations warring with the undeniable image of Ella collapsing after eating the very food she was accused of poisoning. It didn't add up. Finally, a doctor emerged. Ella was stable. They had pumped her stomach. She had ingested a fast-acting, non-lethal, but potent toxin, likely designed to cause severe distress rather than death. She would recover, but she needed rest. Relief immense and overwhelming washed over Richard, quickly followed by cold, hard anger. He sat by Ella's bedside as she slept, pale and still. He watched her peaceful face, the lingering traces of fear even in sleep, and made a decision. There was one way to know the truth for sure. He quietly left the hospital and drove straight back to the mansion. He went directly to his study and accessed the security system, pulling up the footage from the living room camera for that afternoon. He watched his blood running cold as the scene unfolded exactly as he now suspected. He saw Ella bring the noodles. He saw her leave, and then he saw Victoria glancing furtively towards the kitchen doorway before quickly, deliberately, shaking a small vial of powder into the bowl. The evidence was undeniable, sickening. When Victoria returned later that evening, expecting sympathy and perhaps praising her quick thinking, she found Richard waiting in the living room, his face like stone. "Richard, is she—" "Pack your things, Victoria," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. She blinked. What are you talking about? Don't pretend." Richard cut her off, his voice dangerously soft. He gestured towards the large flat-screen TV on the wall. "There's a camera in this room, Victoria. A very discreet one, and I've seen everything." He picked up a remote, and the screen flickered to life, showing the damning footage of her poisoning the noodles. Victoria's face drained of all color as she watched herself commit the act. Shock, denial, then pure, unadulterated panic flashed across her features. "Richard, I can explain. There's nothing to explain," he stated flatly. "You deliberately poisoned Ella. You framed her. You could have killed her. Get your things and get out of my house. Now, if you are not gone in 1 hour, I will call the police and hand this footage over to them. Make your choice." He turned his back on her, the dismissal absolute. Victoria stood frozen for a moment, the reality crashing down on her, exposed, defeated, trembling, with a mixture of fury and fear, knowing she had no way out. She finally turned and fled towards her room, her reign of calculated cruelty ending not with a bang, but with the quiet, undeniable click of a security recording. Later, back at the hospital, Richard sat beside Ella's bed as she slowly opened her eyes. Seeing him there, his face etched with worry, but also a strange calm, she whispered, "Sir, what happened?" He took her hand gently. "You're going to be okay, Ella," he reassured her. "You're safe now." He paused, then met her confused gaze. "Victoria is gone. I know what she did. I saw it all. She won't ever hurt you again." Ella stared at him, trying to process his words. Gone. He knew relief washed over her, so profound, it felt like exhaustion. But beneath the relief lay the deep, shuddering echo of the trauma, the poison, the betrayal. She was safe, yes, but she felt utterly adrift. The ground beneath her shifting once more. She looked at Richard, the man who had saved her, brought her into his home, and whose fiancé had tried to destroy her. Gratitude warred with fear, confusion, and a dawning awareness of just how complicated her life had become. What now, returning to the quiet mansion, felt different this time. Victoria was gone, the oppressive tension lifting like a physical weight. But the echoes of the trauma remained. Ella moved through the first few days, like a ghost treading carefully on fragile ground. Nightmares sometimes visited sharp and sudden, leaving her trembling in the pre-dawn darkness. Yet beneath the fear, a seedling of strength began to unfurl. Richard, true to his word, gave her space, but remained a quiet, reassuring presence. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, offered comforting cups of tea and gentle, unspoken understanding. One quiet afternoon, Ella found herself sitting by the window in her room, the new sketchbook Richard had given her, resting unopened on her lap. Hesitantly, she picked up one of the smooth, new pencils. Her hand trembled slightly at first, the memory of torn pages still raw. But then, taking a deep breath, she touched the pencil to the clean white paper. She began to draw not the harsh, jagged lines of her despair, but the gentle curve of a flower from the garden outside, losing herself just for a moment in the simple act of creation. Healing had begun, Richard respecting her need for quiet recovery, focused on practical support. A week after her return, he approached her gently. "Ella," he began, "I've made some inquiries. There's a good college nearby with excellent art and design programs. I remember you mentioning, or rather I saw in your drawings, that you have an interest. I've arranged a meeting with their admissions tutor, if you'd like to go. All expenses covered." Of course, he presented it not as charity, but as an opportunity, a promise kept. Tears welled in Ella's eyes, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated hope. "Sir Richard S. Yes, I would like that very much." "Thank you." Their conversations deepened in the following weeks. They spoke not just of daily routines, but of dreams, fears, and snippets of their pasts. One evening, sharing a simple supper, Ella confessed an embarrassing story about accidentally tripping during a school play, ending up tangled in the scenery. Richard listened, chuckling warmly before sharing one of his own. "Don't feel too bad," he said, with a self-deprecating smile. "At my first major charity gala after taking over the company, I was so nervous trying to impress everyone, I managed to spill an entire glass of red wine down the front of the mayor's very white shirt." Ella laughed, a real unrestrained sound that seemed to brighten the entire room. Their bond grew organically built on shared moments and mutual respect. One Saturday, wanting to show her appreciation, Ella decided to try baking cookies from a recipe book she found. The results were enthusiastic, if not entirely successful. Some were slightly burnt, others oddly shaped. She presented them to Richard with a sheepish grin. He took one, examined its rather unique appearance thoughtfully, and took a bite. He pronounced seriously, then broke into a warm smile. "The flavor is certainly adventurous, Ella. But I like adventure." "Thank you." The easy warmth in his eyes meant more to her than any perfectly baked treat ever could. One evening, sitting together in the library, the comfortable silence stretched between them. Richard turned to her, his usual calm demeanor touched with a hint of vulnerability. "Ella," he said softly, his gaze earnest. "Over these past months, watching you, talking with you, you've brought a light into this house, into my life that I didn't realize was missing. Your kindness, your strength, your quiet grace. It amazes me." He paused, taking a breath. "I know this might be sudden, perhaps inappropriate given everything, but I've fallen in love with you." Ella's heart leaped. She stared at him, speechless emotions swirling within her. Shock, joy, and the lingering shadow of self-doubt. "Richard, I'm just—" "Don't," he interrupted, gently understanding her unspoken hesitation. "Don't say you're just anything. It's not about where you came from or what you've endured. It's about who you are right now and who you are." Ella is extraordinary. She looked down, twisting her hands in her lap. The fear, the feeling of unworthiness whispered at the edges of her mind. But looking up into Richard's sincere eyes, seeing the genuine affection there, she made her choice. She chose to believe in him, in this unexpected, precious chance at happiness, And finally in herself, Richard, she whispered, her voice trembling but clear, "I think I'm falling in love with you too." A few months later, standing in the sunlit garden, Richard took her hands. "Ella," he began, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "I want to spend the rest of my life learning more about your adventurous cooking and watching you fill sketchbooks. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Ella's face as she nodded, unable to speak, simply throwing her arms around him. Yes, she managed finally. Yes, their wedding was small and intimate, attended by close friends Mr. Henderson beaming with pride, and a supportive Mrs. Gable. Ella, radiant in a simple white dress, looked every bit the cherished bride. Richard kept his promise, supporting her through college, where she excelled, fueled by her own experiences. She later established a small foundation, using her growing artistic success and Richard's resources to help other young women who found themselves lost and alone, offering them the kind of support she herself had desperately needed years past. One quiet evening, Ella and Richard sat on their patio, watching the sunset paint the sky. An old framed sketch rested on a nearby table, one of Ella's early rough drawings from the construction site, which Richard had carefully salvaged and framed years ago. He picked it up, a nostalgic smile playing on his lips. You see, he teased gently, pointing to the drawing of a concrete pillar. "Even back then, I could tell you had a special talent for turning cement into high art." Ella laughed, leaning her head against his shoulder, a deep sense of peace settling over her. The scars of the past remained not forgotten, but integrated into the tapestry of a life rebuilt with courage, kindness, and a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. It wasn't a fairy tale ending handed down by fate, it was peace, real, tangible, and hard-earned, and together they knew it was just the beginning. From the harsh shadows of the streets to the quiet warmth of a hard-won life, Ella's journey leaves us breathless, doesn't it? It makes you wonder about the quiet strength hidden within us, the resilience that can endure even when hope seems like a distant memory. How often, perhaps, does true value lie unseen, waiting not for grand fortune, but simply for the kindness of a single moment? A single person who chooses to truly see life rarely follows a straight path, and sometimes the deepest connections are forged in the most unexpected circumstances, built not on status or appearance, but on the quiet recognition of a kindred spirit. This story, with its heartaches and its healing, certainly left us reflecting long after the final words, and it makes us curious. What thoughts or feelings did Ella and Richard's path stir within you? What does earned peace truly mean to you after witnessing Ella's journey from despair to fulfillment? We would be genuinely moved to read your perspective in the comments below. Your insights always add so much depth to these stories. If this story resonated with you, if it touched your heart, or gave you a moment of hope, please show your appreciation by giving this video a thumbs up. It truly helps us know what connects with you. And if you believe this story carries a message that might uplift or offer comfort to someone else, please consider sharing it with them. Of course, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell. We'd love for you to join us as we continue to explore more meaningful journeys and powerful human emotions together in our future stories. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today and sharing in this emotional experience. Until our next story, take good care.